Hey, everybody. This is the Legends of Tabletop podcast. This is episode 75. I have with me tonight Jeff Barber. So, how's it going, Jeff?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. You've got a awesome Kickstarter going on right now, so we wanted to bring you in and talk about that and help promote you as much as we could. So, what do you got going on?
We are kickstarting a new RPG called Upwind, and we pitch it as Wizards by Ralph Bakshi has a head-on collision with Disney's Treasure Planet, and we put out the resulting fire with a whole bunch of Studio Ghibli. If you get any of those movie references, then you kind of get where the game is coming from.
Cool. I have a VHS copy of Wizards, I think, somewhere floating around in my garage.
All right.
Although I have to admit, it'd be a long time since I've seen it.
Yeah, that's the one that most people haven't seen. That's definitely old school.
Yeah. Well, let's non sequitur for a moment because I forgot already right after I told you before we jumped on air. We have a segment at the front called Something Cool. So do you have anything cool that's been going on?
Well, yeah, I just thinking you kind of said maybe not gaming, and I was trying to think when you're in the middle of running a Kickstarter, it's kind of like life consuming. Every free moment you got, especially in my case when you're working a day job as well. So I kept thinking, oh no, that was Kickstarter. Oh no, that was an interview. No, that was more Kickstarter. But last weekend, my wife and I are both high school teachers. We teach at a boarding school actually. And one of the things that she does, she's an English teacher. One of the things she does is she runs a creative writing activity. And just last weekend, we got to go up to a local town up here on the coast where a professional writer, fiction writer, and his daughter both run little seminars for teenage writers to encourage them to become writers and to publish. And so we got to spend the weekend with them, really kind of helping the girls work on their craft as writers. And so that was really fun. It was really educational. Unfortunately, we got chased out. We had a big storm come through, like the storm of the century. We got chased out by bad weather, but had to come home a little early. But it was really fun, really good, definitely cool.
Cool, something different. I have a super special thing that I'm working on for the podcast that I can't really talk about yet, but I can share.
You're just teasing everybody.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what we have to do.
Coming back, right?
Right. So I received a copy of Pairs along with the companion guide for Pairs from Cheap Ass Games. So I'll be getting a review up for that soon, I hope. So I'm looking forward to getting that on the table. And we're actually going to have James Ernst on the podcast, I believe, on November 14th. So we'll have that as a lead-in to James coming on. So that's pretty cool. We'll jump in here. So I apologize on the front end because I know you've been doing a lot of this Kickstarter stuff. So probably a lot of these questions and things are gonna, sort of repeat to some of the other things you've been on.
It's been a real benefit because it's had me thinking a lot about the questions that get asked or the answers that I give, which has actually helped me look at the game and kind of critically in ways that have helped in the editing process. So I think the game's getting better because I have to answer a lot of questions about it, which is something I just didn't expect, and it's been a boon.
Yeah, cool. Unexpected benefit. That's good. All right. Well, you started out way back in the day at Pagan Publishing. What were you working on over there? What was the experience like?
That was a long time ago. I met John Tynes at a gaming club on campus. We were both at the same university, and he was talking about this fanzine. I didn't even know what a fanzine was. He wanted to start doing for Call of Cthulhu. At the time, I didn't even know what Call of Cthulhu was. And he needed some art, and I kind of did art sort of on the side. I started out, believe it or not, as an illustrator in the industry, and I just was never good enough to really follow that path. But so I did some illustrations for him, and then when he decided to start Pagan, I was kind of there just by default and was one of the founding members as a result. So I did art direction and production direction. I wrote a few things like the Grace Under Pressure scenario he and I wrote together, and a couple other things like that, some articles and what have you, and helped with some of the development of Delta Green and that kind of thing. it really at the time wasn't really a plan to go anywhere. So it was just kind of doing it because it was fun. And I really became a fan of Call of Cthulhu and horror RPGs in general. But it was definitely exciting enough that when I parted ways with Pagan, I wanted to kind of stay in the industry.
Mhm. And you kind of split ways when they went to Seattle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, was Dennis and Adam there when you were there?
Dennis and I overlapped by probably 6 months.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
I've met Adam a couple of times, but not they didn't really have a tight association until after they'd moved up here.
Gotcha. Okay. It's interesting to see all the connections and things, especially for someone who didn't really know what Call of Cthulhu was, and now, you look at these guys and like, man, you were there then.
Yeah. Well, back in the day, the industry just was not as big as it is now. I went to Gen Con this summer for the first time since it left Milwaukee. And I walked in a dealer's room and I was just blown away. I couldn't believe how big everything had gotten and how many people were there.
Yeah, it's enormous now. I think what was the numbers for this year, like 70 or 80,000 or something like that.
Yeah, I heard various, but definitely well over 60 for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy. So after you left Pagan, then you started Biohazard Games like right around that time.
Yeah. I wanted to keep making games, and at the time, it seemed like really the only way to do that if you didn't have a connection with another company, which I didn't anymore. And given the lack of social media at the time, right, it was hard. It was hard to just sort of reach out and create those connections. And since I'd sort of been there for the founding of Pagan, I kind of knew how that worked. So I thought, I'll make a new company and write a game. Or I guess really it was that order. I'll write a game. I guess to do a game, you have to have a company. So I'll do the company too. And started working on Blue Planet.
Mm-hmm. Origin nominated. Did it win in '97?
No, we were up against L5R, which was a dreadnought at the time. And so I guess if we're going to lose against something, it's okay to lose against that. But we did win Game of the Year in France that year. So I'm not even quite sure what the award was. We just got an email one day, and I didn't speak a lot. I don't speak any French, so it never really got sorted out. But so I guess that's the consolation prize. Yeah, no, it was fun. It was really cool to be recognized for that because the game. Boy, we were afraid that Blue Planet wasn't, we thought it was going to languish on a few game store shelves, and that was going to be it. We are still kind of grateful and overwhelmed by the response that it did have in its day.
And it was more of a hard sci-fi as opposed to Upwind, which is more sci-fi, but with a strong fantasy element.
Absolutely, it's sort of the opposite ends of the same spectrum. Blue Planet was intentionally hard science fiction from the start. Your English teacher in middle school tells you write what you know. So I took that to heart. Being a scientist by training, it was kind of a no-brainer that my first love was science fiction. That's what I was going to do. Upwind, by comparison, is science fantasy. It's as far to the end. I mean, yeah, it's fully science fantasy. There's science because there's technology, but there's a lot of magic in it too.
Sure. Yeah, not like Rogue Trader, but like Rogue Trader, completely not setting wise, but
right.
Yeah. And how long? Well, the book was massive, right? I mean, like 350 pages or something like that.
The first edition of Blue Planet, yeah, it was pretty big. Like I said, we were not convinced that it was going to have much appeal, and I thought it was probably going to be our only shot at getting this out there. So we wanted the book to be as complete a world as possible. We wanted everyone to have what they needed to play, as much Blue Planet as they wanted in just the single book, and so we really kind of pushed the page count on it.
Sure. And how long was it before it was picked up by Fantasy Flight? And were you surprised? How surprised?
Well, it wasn't so much a surprise because we kind of worked that deal with them. We were I don't know 2.5 years in. We had done a couple 3 supplements. We did Archipelago and Access Denied, and we had met them at Origins or Gen Con, and we talked around. It was around the time that the Disc Wars hit. Do you remember Disc Wars?
I don't know.
It was a miniatures game that was played with these little discs, and you'd flip them over, and it was kind of a poor man's miniatures game. It was a big hit. It was a total blast to play. I still love the game, but they found themselves with a hot property and wanting to expand the company and get some role playing games in their library. And so our conversations just kind of turned towards, hey, what do you think about sort of a joint publication on this thing? And I was kind of looking to get out of it, sort of, and that was sort of where that happened. We said, sure, let's do that. And they said, well, one thing, you gotta come and do line editing for us. You got to come work at the company and run the line. And well, I've got a job that I like, and I don't really want to give that up. And my partner at the time was looking for a change, Greg Benage, who was my partner in Biohazard. And so he said, I'll go. And he did. And he actually did a whole bunch of development for them through the years, working on a lot of different titles. And it was actually probably a much better thing that he went, because I think he was much more productive for them than I might have been.
Sure.
Yeah.
And eventually rights passed back to Biohazard, so you own your game again now?
Yeah, well, we never didn't own it, and we always retained creative control and such over it. They had just licensed it. So it came back to us, and then we licensed it to a company named Red Brick, and they then changed their affiliations and did a partnership themselves and became FASA, and then became Capricious. And then in the last year or so, they've given up that license option, and now it's back in our hands.
Okay. Any plans to get that back out there again, or?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I know people have been asking that. I don't know. I'm assuming it's obvious you've done your homework, so you know that we're teamed up now with Nocturnal Media and Stuart Wick, and we've already had conversations about what comes after Upwind, and there's a lot of people out there who still really like Blue Planet. We just did a bundle of holding a few months ago, and it blew me away how many people were still into it. So there's talk of maybe doing not just sort of the next year is the 20th anniversary. Actually, 20 years is crazy, right?
Nice.
Yeah.
Right.
So we've talked about maybe doing something like a full, because it was black and white and all that, but do like a hardcover, full color, all new art kind of slipcase sort of deal, which would be a really cool way to commemorate the 20th anniversary. But there were a bunch of titles that we had planned that we never realized, and it would be great to maybe fire some of those up using the resources of something like Kickstarter to really fund those by people who want to see them happen. So we've talked about that, and who knows, that might actually happen. I'd be super excited to see something like that come down.
Cool. Really nice. And it's a low risk for you relatively,
Well, I think so.
Kickstarter route, these days.
Yeah, it is. It's low risk, but it's definitely compared to the way we did it originally. And we put, a lot of time and money into it, all on spec, right? Not knowing what was going to happen. And now you can, I guess that's not fair to say. It seems like everybody's putting a lot of money into their stuff before they hit Kickstarter these days. So it's maybe not quite the proof of concept kind of thing it was before, and now more pre-order. But still, I think it would help us generate realistic goals, right? But it also lets people learn about products in ways that they couldn't before. And I think if people who are fans of Blue Planet knew that it was possibly going to see life again, it might be a great way to utilize that social media aspect of Kickstarter.
Sure. And around that same time, you were also working on, for Fantasy Flight, Midnight, the RPG D20 system.
Yeah, that came a couple of years later. I had almost entirely backed out of the game industry entirely, and was looking to do some new things. When the school I worked at actually closed unexpectedly, it was a little private school, and I don't know. It might not be in most people's kind of experience, but if you're a teacher and your school closes 2 days after graduation, you're kind of out of luck for finding a job for the next year, because everyone's already found their new jobs and all the schools have filled their positions. And so if you find anything, it's probably in a pretty sketchy situation. So here I am at Origins, I think, or maybe Gen Con, I can't remember now. That summer, going, boy, I need a job. And Greg had been working on this idea of Midnight, and they'd come up with a little flyer that they were distributing at the con. And I don't know, as so many things seem to happen at those conventions, so many projects are born over a beer. He's like, hey, you want to work on this? And I said, I'm not really sure I can do a fantasy game, but I'll give it a try. So I said, tell you what, give me 1 week. I'll see if I can write 10,000 words this week and you like them, then I'll keep working on it. So I did, and he did. And then here I am working on a fantasy game all of a sudden. And that turned out to be a nice stretch of my abilities. And it was really fun. And I really kind of like what came out of it. Dark fantasy is not everybody's cup of tea, but I'm not the biggest fantasy fan myself anymore, but I really like dark fantasy, and that was really fun to work on.
Cool. Yeah, I was looking at it. It looks really like it's dark. It looks really dark.
Yeah, and the pitch for that was always easy. Everyone always accuses us of ripping off Tolkien. Like, hell yeah, we did, right? Like, I mean, what fantasy doesn't? But really, we just imagined what would happen if Sauron had won, and it was 100 years later.
Right, right.
That was pretty much the game.
And I mean, it's reminiscent now, to look at Fantasy Flight and go, oh man, it's kind of like, Warhammer Fantasy kind of thing, just that dark, gritty, dark fantasy thing. But it's easy to make that comparison now,
Sure.
sitting in front of the computer.
Sure.
Yeah, no, so that's definitely cool. And it's weird now, as I was doing the research looking into stuff to see, wow, like Fantasy Flight, went for the OGL to publish for, Wizards of the Coast. It just seems like a really weird
I think
way for things to happen,
Yeah, that was the heyday of D20, right? Like everybody, that was the first sort of major expansion. I think it's that kind of interesting parallel because that was one of the things that put a lot of life back into the industry, just like I think Kickstarter has done. It is lowered the threshold to entry for a lot of people, and that's been a pretty cool effect. But yeah, for sure.
And you alluded to or said a couple of times that you were trying to sort of get away from game design. Was it any specific instance or just sort of fatigue for like say working on Blue Planet for years and years? And
it's just hard, as most people in the game industry know. It's really hard because we don't do it full time. We do it on the side of whatever full-time gig is keeping our roof over our head and our food in the fridge. And so you have to sacrifice a lot of your personal time and relationships and other possible activities to making the game. And I kind of done that a couple of times now. And I had, there'd been a couple of relationships, I think, that suffered from it. And I was looking to change jobs in a pretty dramatic way. I wanted to go work overseas. In fact, I signed up for the Peace Corps. And you can't really, I didn't have the stamina to really do those kinds of things while also making those big changes in my life. And it was kind of just a decision that, did that. Now what's the next challenge going to be?
Sure. Yeah. People for the most part who are, designing games and in the industry, they're not in it to make money really. They're doing it because they have a passion for games and gaming and, bringing people together under that umbrella. So yeah, that can be tough.
I think the trouble is, well, for me anyway, it's kind of like an infection. It may go dormant for a while, but after a while it comes back and you're like, I got this idea for a game. And honestly, that's what was Upwind. I mean, the initial idea for Upwind is, God, it's almost 12 years old now, I think. And even though I worked on it piecemeal off and on over that time, I haven't gotten serious about it until maybe a year and a half ago. But it just wouldn't go away. And that was ultimately what led me to try and get it out and publish it, was because I just was sitting on this idea and it kept occupying my thoughts and I kept wondering about things and kept coming up with ideas to enhance it. And so, okay, fine. I'm just going to see if I can get it out there.
Get ahead of my head.
Yep. Yeah. Honestly, that's the way it works, right? It's like those things you can't, at night you're trying to sleep and you can't get anything out of your head. You get up and you type for a few minutes and there you go. Right?
Mm-hmm. And so how did the idea come about? Like, what was the inspiration for Upwind?
Well, the story, it sounds a little apocryphal, but it's kind of true. I was living in Hawaii at the time, working at a little school down there, and there's a big hill behind the campus on the side of Mauna Kea, which is this big volcano. And I had climbed up. I used to hike up there for exercise, and I hiked up there one day, and I was looking out over the water, and the sky was that kind of slate gray where there's no depth perception. It's just this weird effect of the light. They call it flat light.
Hmm.
And the water was perfectly smooth, and it was reflecting that light. So it looked like the whole island, instead of sitting in the water, was surrounded in a cloud. And it was just a really dramatic image. And I, every gamer says, "Oh, that would be so cool to include in a game," right?
Right.
And I had that thought and didn't think much of it, and then went on, and it was, then I kept thinking about it and kept coming back to it. Someone coincidentally also introduced me to Studio Ghibli for the first time while I was living in Hawaii. And so I was watching some of those movies like, Valley of the Wind and Princess Mononoke, and particularly Castle in the Sky. And I was just thinking, well, there's some great game ideas in there. And the two of them just sort of melded together. And about that same time, I've got some old gaming friends from back in the Blue Planet days who every year we would get together, about 10 of us, and rent a house out in the woods and just have 4 days of role playing. We all try and run cool games for each other over the course of a 4-day weekend.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really fun. And we've been doing it for years. And we sometimes try to have themes. And in this case, this year, the theme was going to be everyone create a new setting. Bring it, run it with some game system that you think fits, and just run a game in your new setting. And that's essentially where Upwind came for me. I took this idea that I'd been sitting in my head about the floating islands and watching a lot of Studio Ghibli, and I thought, I'll just make Studio Ghibli the role-playing game with floating islands. And that was, I spent, a couple weekends writing up maybe 5,000 or 10,000 words describing the setting, and then ran it, and it evolved from there.
Cool. Very cool. And what's that sort of gives us a description of what the setting's all about. So what's you want to go into a little bit more detail as far as sort of the setting material and that kind of stuff?
Sure. Yeah. It is a hard game to pitch, and that bit about the movies, and the putting out the fire with Studio Ghibli and Treasure Planet and stuff actually is as close to a quick pitch as I can give. But the setting itself is a little bit alternate world. It's intentionally not supposed to be familiar. It's not supposed to necessarily follow our laws of physics. It's not supposed to be explicable in any way that we might be familiar with. It is science fantasy. There is an endless sky with no apparent boundaries, at least none that are readily apparent to the characters in the game. As you go up, it becomes brighter and hotter. There's a sourceless glow of warmth and light. As you go down, the intervening islands, the fog, the clouds, the squalls, the haze makes it dimmer and dimmer, and eventually completely dark. So you have the kingdoms in the light, where the characters are from, the kin, and you have the dark, where they're sort of ancestral enemies dwell. And the main campaign follows the adventures of the Explorer Knights. They are a ancient order of highly trained elementalists and scientists and engineers and scholars and warriors who are sort of the arbitrators amongst the kingdoms in the light. They help keep the peace in the kingdoms in the light, but they also explore the twilight frontier and the dark in efforts to recover lost technology from the Masters of the Wind, an ancient culture that was lost to the downfall. They are also charged with defending the kingdoms in the light from the children of the dark, and so stand as sort of this bulwark between this ancient threat and the growing civilization, the recovering civilization of the kin. And the default campaign, though you can do anything you want with it, but the default campaign is that you play members of this guild. And specifically, your gaming group are members of individual boat crews within this guild. And of course, it's a world of flying, sailing ships, and it's a world where elemental magic is pervasive. That every character is highly trained, not only in their particular skills, academic and martial skills, but also in their potential in either arc or wind or ore or rain. In fact, all the kin have some level of elemental power. It's just that the knights have exceptional power, and that's why they are recruited as very young children to the academy to be trained and to join the guild. The setting is on the brink of what's called the third incursion of the Children of the Dark. The third incursion is appears to be beginning. It's a sort of another ramping up of the war between the Children of the Dark and the Guild and the Kingdoms of the Light, and that's sort of the moment in which the game is set. So it's a diverse setting that we provide a lot of background to, especially to help explain sort of the bizarre nature of it, so that people can play in it and understand how it's supposed to work. But we do leave a whole lot of mystery in all directions, with the express intent of giving room for game masters to tell the kinds of stories they want. Exploration is a big theme. Teamwork and defending against the threats against the kingdoms are big themes in the game. The advance of this sort of bizarre technology is a big part of the story. So there's a lot of avenues to tell lots of different kinds of stories.
And because of the mechanics that, and we'll get into that, I guess, a little bit, it's easier to, so it's not like D&D where you're pouring through books to stat up monsters and you're trying to do all these
not
different
at all
things. So with the Q system, which is a card-based conflict resolution mechanic,
yes,
you make your wagers, right? I mean, it almost doesn't matter what the stats are. You just do I
Yeah, for sure. It's a little more, I guess, mechanical for the players, but for moderators, there is no statting up anything. There's no stats for NPCs. There's no stats for monsters. There's no stats for equipment. The only decision moderators have to make, and they make this on the fly, is how difficult is the challenge? How difficult is this thing that the players are trying to do? And you have to choose: is it a 1 level difficulty, a 2, or a 3? It couldn't be any simpler. That's the number of cards you get to bid from your hand. That's what you essentially wager against the players' stakes. It's a little more complicated for the players, but not much. The characters have attributes. They have 3 sets of them. They have skills. They have abilities, skills, and their what's called potential. Their supernatural abilities. The abilities are the things that they're inherently good at. The skills are the things that their characters have trained up in. And their potential is one of the 4 cardinal elements that they have chosen for their character to be trained in. And if anybody's familiar with games like Fate or Dogs in the Vineyard, where the attributes for the characters are phrases or descriptions more than individual numbers, and that the players create those phrases and descriptions, not just to say what a character can do, but who their character is. That's sort of the mechanic behind character generation in Upwind. You generate the person you want your character to be. You describe with these evocative phrases, so that you can describe their nature, their personality, what they want, their history, their future, but also what they're able to do. And you try to do those in elaborate ways that allow you to use them in lots of different situations. So in that, there's a little bit of gaming or gamesmanship. But then those are given numbers, and those numbers represent the numbers of cards that the players get to play out of their hands, and then you make your wagers based on those. The core mechanic is just generating the stakes that describe what you're trying to accomplish and what the outcomes will be, and they can be fairly simple and small scale, or they can be large and reach into the future of the story and the characters in pretty profound ways.
Right, and it's it's a narrative based system, and it's got a really strong meta element because you're negotiating for stakes. So like the player's like, I want to do this thing, and then the GM's like, okay, it's going to be 1 card challenge, 2 card challenge, and you're going to discuss terms, and then on the GM's end, they have a hand, so it's you can see them succeed and play a low card. If you're like, no, I want the story to go in this direction, you can play a joker or whatever higher card to.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of sort of nudging that can happen, a lot of meta decisions that can happen, a lot of agency that not only do the mechanics provide both the players, or most of the moderators and the players, but there's also a lot of agency that the creation of the stakes gives to the players. So the way the queue system works is the players get to steer the story in pretty dramatic ways, where they have a much more influence over what happens to their characters and what happens within the thread of the narrative than they might in a more traditional incremental system.
Sure, sure. Yeah, the random, which is fun with most RPGs. Well, we leave it up to fate, and whatever the dice, we come up with the coolest plan in the world, but you roll a 1, and
Sure.
you fail.
But even with that traditional system, you roll a 1, and in an incremental system, it's very rare that a single die roll determines the course of the story.
That's true. Yep.
I mean, it happens. There's lots of ways that it can happen, but with Upwind, with the Q system, individual plays, at the end of each play, the story takes a left turn or a right turn, because it either follows the stakes that the players have promoted or that have proposed, or the stakes that the moderator have proposed, and so it's going to go one of those two ways, in often very dramatic ways. And the neat thing is that the players and the moderator, they negotiate back and forth to settle on these stakes, and so when they're ready to make their bids, they've agreed to it going in either one of those directions. And so theoretically, both sides are happy with it going either way, or at least interested to see what happens.
Sure.
And it makes for a very different kind of storytelling in which the players have a really incredible amount of agency.
Right. I'm highlighting. I'm going through all the questions. So what was it like coming up with this diceless mechanic? Were you influenced by any other games that were out currently, or was this, it's almost like playing War to a certain extent.
Oh yeah, yeah, it is. Probably the biggest influence. I played Dogs in the Vineyard, and I guess I should back up a little bit. When I created Upwind, like I said before, it was just a setting. There was no mechanics associated with it. Independently and at a different time, I was toying with trying to generate a system of mechanics that would allow people to bid on what they wanted to accomplish. So not so much that I was thinking at that time about a bidding on stakes, but I was thinking it would be neat if you had a body of points that you could use to spend on what you wanted to accomplish for your character, and everything would kind of have like an a la carte menu. You'd start the game with 100 points, and if and hitting successfully with a sword against this kind of enemy costs this many points. So you could know what you were spending against and having to shepherd that against what might still be coming in the story. That didn't really pan out because of various reasons that you can probably imagine. But the idea of having this bidding mechanic and somehow being able to regulate that by points stuck with me. And when I took me longer than it should have, most people think, oh yeah, cards. There's lots of games where you bid on things with cards. So when I started thinking about it in terms of cards, then that mechanic started to evolve. And actually played it with Blue Planet for the first time was when we used it. It was just to use that as the setting to test out the mechanics. So that's where it originated, not really with the intention of powering Upwind at all, actually.
Okay. And that sort of mechanic leads to very quick conflict resolution. I mean, however long it takes you to negotiate stakes is how long your combat or social combat or whatever is going to take.
Absolutely. And using stakes wasn't even originally part of the idea when I was thinking of cards and bidding. But then I played Dogs in the Vineyard. I don't know if you're familiar with that game. Yeah, and I was just amazed at this idea of sort of talking about what is going to happen if you succeed and figuring that out ahead of time, right? This whole idea. I've been up to that point. I've been a pretty sort of simulationist kind of gamer. I really liked the idea of telling the story in as much a continuous narrative thread as possible. And this whole idea of jumping essentially ahead to the future and talking about what will happen if certain things go certain ways was just opened up a whole new kind of idea about gaming, this sort of Quentin Tarantino non-consecutive storytelling kind of way. And it was really interesting. And so I was really inspired by that game and other stakes-based games. And that's when the stakes-based mechanic came into the card system.
Cool. And players can acquire equipment that will give them a cache that they can use, so extra cards that they can put into their draw deck that would potentially give them a bonus on different.
Yeah, there's a variety of ways to get bonus cards. One of the biggest and most broadly applicable is the caches, and that can come from equipment. That can come from each character is created bearing several caches. They help describe your character and what they're capable of doing. So they're bonus cards that can be used under certain circumstances. Knights, by virtue of being knights, get a cache card called the Knight's Blade, which is because of their exceptional training and abilities, is a bonus they get. But you can also award caches as parts of stakes. So you can negotiate stakes and say, well, if you accomplish this, you have so impressed your crew, for example, that next time you ask them to go above and beyond, they're going to be worth a bonus card in the play. And you can use that if those circumstances come up that are specifically defined in terms of what the crew is able to do. Conversely, Game Master can also earn those. You can say, well, if you fail this, your crew will now have less trust in you. And next time you ask them to go above and beyond, they are going to hesitate. And it's going to be a bonus card played against you. It's called a challenge card, a challenge cache. And you can use caches and the awarding of caches or the threat of challenge caches to help create really interesting and fun stakes. And those can stack up as consequences that will follow the characters through the rest of the story until they're realized or until they are obviated.
Cool. Now you said that originally this was just a setting with no mechanics. Do you find it's easier to work on setting material than it is to try to come up with mechanics to drive those settings, or do you kind of like enjoy both aspects of that, or prefer one over the other?
I would have said the former. I would have said settings were easier a few years ago. Blue Planet started out as setting. Midnight, because it was a D20 game, was essentially I just did setting. Upwind started as setting. I'm a setting guy. I'm not really strong at mechanics design. I'm pretty proud of the queue system, but I kind of feel like I stumbled into it by accident. But I've really become a huge fan of games where, over the last decade or so, of games that are really trying to make the setting better by the mechanics integrating, and making this mechanics better by the setting integrating. And I really like games that are doing that, where the line between the two kind of gets blurred, and if you take one aspect away, then your game's not as strong. And I hope Upwind is doing that. I hope that the two are integrated enough that they're informing each other. Even that marriage between the queue system and Upwind was a little bit accidental, and has only proven to be really synergistic because of the way the structure of card decks are. The setting of Upwind really revolves around the four elements in some ways, anyway. And of course, cards revolve around the four suits. And that was what, when I realized that's what made me decide to put the system and the setting together. And the nature of cards has only further informed the structure of play. And it's been just every time I play, even still, I see new ways that the cards can interact with the conceits of the setting. And it's been a really easy way to real easy marriage between those two different things.
Okay. How many iterations of Upwind have you gone through to the point of getting it up to Kickstarter?
Are you speaking more about the mechanics, or
both? I mean, yeah.
Well,
how long have you been working on it? And
Well, like I said, the idea is about 10 or 12 years old, but I decided to actually publish it about almost this March. I think it'll be 2 years. And so it's been pretty steady work since then. I think the setting has just grown. It hasn't really been iterations. There's been things that I've added in and dropped out, but the core of the setting has really sort of been fundamentally unchanged. The mechanics has gone through more like versions, not right or left turns, but there have been moments where I go, oh, hey, like the cache part. The caches didn't exist until about a year ago. And up until that point, I was often thinking, well, I don't think these mechanics are going to work. I think they're going to get too boring and too limited, and people are going to be playing all of their high cards and find there's not going to be a lot of variety in the outcomes. And the caches have proven to be really valuable, not only in how the moderator can tell stories, because they can use them to adjust the stakes or to enhance the stakes, but they've put a lot more unpredictability into the outcome. And so there's been kind of leaps forward in I guess what you'd call version numbers. And that was for example, one of the examples of a big change.
Okay. Now, are you envisioning this as part of a new game line for Biohazard? Is this sort of a standalone product, or where are you looking at going forward from here?
Well, originally, when it was just Biohazard going to produce it, we wanted to kickstart it, just the book, and see where it went. I had kind of thought, I'll just do this thing, get it out there. And like Blue Planet, I didn't know how it would be received. I just wanted to get enough out there that people could play it. And who knows about the future, but let's make sure that the package is complete for people that back it. Hooked up with Stuart this summer, and he has a lot of experience and a lot of was offering a lot of support to the line. And that's when we decided to turn some of what were going to be stretch goals, the card deck and the campaign book, into actual parts of the Kickstarter project. So those will be products that are produced with the funding of this Kickstarter. And so, by default, there's a mini line, at least, that comes out of the Kickstarter, a 3-product line with the stretch goals associated with it that we now have. We are going to keep it alive. We're obviously going to produce books to put into distribution. And that would be one of the big contributions that Nocturnal Media makes, is that they'll be distributing the game, into the future. Most role-playing games tail out, right? But we'll see where this goes, and hopefully it will have a life beyond the Kickstarter for sure.
Okay. And I think I heard somewhere that Jeff Stowe is doing all the art for the book.
James, yeah. That's the plan at this point. It may grow to the point where one artist is unrealistic, but he's really created a great vision for the line. I love the way the art is sort of defining the setting. In my head now, it looks less like Studio Ghibli and more like Studio James, and I think that's a good thing. And so we'll see where that goes, but that's the plan at this point for sure.
Okay. Are you working? Do you have any other projects in the works past Upwind, or potentially, re-releasing Blue Planet?
Well, like I said, we talked some about that, and my mantra these days is just get Upwind done. Just get Upwind done.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we'll get Upwind done and see. But we have talked about some of what might have to happen for Blue Planet to see new light, and we've also talked about a couple of other things that are interesting synergies, interesting coincidences that Stuart has in the works, but I'm going to leave it for him to get to talk about those.
Okay. So when you're creating, you obviously do a lot of your own play testing. You get, feedback from, your home group, or maybe you pass it along to a little bit of a larger group. And, kind of like Caleb has said with, feedback that he's gotten from Red Market, some of it's like, well, there's no guy named Jeff and I hate it, which obviously is not useful feedback.
Sure.
But have you listened to, and I know Ross over at RPPRs has played a game, play tested a little while back. Have you listened to a lot of recorded sessions, and is that helpful for you as like something completely different than, just sitting and playing a game and kind of asking players, all right, well, what did you think about this? Or, what did you think about that?
Yes, and yes. Those are all true. Playtesting is key, and honestly, the reason I got hooked up with Ross in the first place was I stumbled on their podcast when I was trying to run an Eclipse Phase game, and I wanted to hear other people play it. And then as I started working on Upwind, I thought, wow, it would be really great to hear other people play Upwind. People who don't, because at that point, everyone who'd ever played, I had been running the game. And I knew how it was supposed to work, so I didn't know if the mechanics actually worked for anybody else.
Sure.
Right? And so I thought, once I got to the point where I had enough of the mechanics in a document that someone could read it and run it, I wanted to see if it actually worked for someone else. And I just contacted him one day and said, "Hey, you know me, but I was wondering if you guys take requests." And he was super gracious, and he said sure, and I sent him the stuff, and he got back to me eventually, and I said, "Yeah, I did a demo," and he sent me the recording, and it worked well enough. I mean, our PPR guys have their own kind of style. I think I think they add it to whatever game they play. You're gonna know who's playing it, even if you didn't recognize the voices. But it was the start of a relationship with them. And oddly enough, coincidentally enough, so they live in Springfield, Missouri, and that's where they do their podcast. Well, this personal gaming convention I mentioned earlier tonight. I used to live in Columbia, Missouri, and I go back to Columbia every year for this convention. And we usually go down to the sticks, which in Missouri is the Ozarks, which is like an hour or two from Springfield, Missouri. So I'm heading out there for this weekend, and I said, "Hey Ross, I'm going to be in the neighborhood, literally. You mind if I stop by and we just talk games and whatever?" So I ended up going down there, and I ran a demo for them, which actually is up on our PPR now, and played in some red markets with Caleb and some other things. I got to meet some of the guys, and it was super fun. And I think I'm hoping it's evolved more into as much of a friendship as a professional relationship. We hung out at Gen Con some, and we've been doing a lot of communication since, and more interviews and things. So yeah, that was the impetus, was to hear them someone else play the game and listen to how they did it, and use that as sort of a new kind of feedback for playtesting. But I think and hope it's evolved into something more than that. It's certainly been a boon for our Kickstarter, because I think most people would be like, Biohazard who? Upwind what?
You're right.
And just the fact that I'm talking to you is really because Ross, like you said earlier, Ross has connected us. So yeah, it's been great working with him, really, and I really appreciate the support he's provided the game. And now he's got this big series that he's running. He's going to be, his Kickstarter just made the other night, actually. His stretch goal just made, and he's going to be writing a mini campaign for Upwind called the Three Beasts, and he's got a sort of a playtest version of it up on his website now.
Cool, very cool. I did see that he was going to be part of the campaign if that stretch goal got unlocked. So
yeah, I think he's actually in Peru right now. And
yes,
he's got intermittent internet, so I think he knows that he's now has 30,000 or 40,000 words to write when he gets home. But yeah, so that's going to be really cool. In fact, we're going to tie his mini campaign into the bigger campaign that I'm writing for the game line, the Prophecy of the Grand Amplifier. So it's going to be a nice little tie-in that people can opt to play both of them with the same characters if they choose to do. We've been talking about how to tie those in.
Cool.
That's going to be fun. I'll actually literally be able to work with him.
Yeah. Well, you said you found them because you were getting ready to run an Eclipse Phase game. Do you listen to a lot of podcasts yourself?
I didn't until I was looking to. Honestly, I was years ago now. Holy crap! It really is a long time ago. I kind of think of it as a recent thing, but it's really about 6 or 8 years ago now. I really got hooked on second edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And I was trying to learn the system cold and run it for some people, and I wanted to really up my game mastering game. I wanted to present a really realized long-term campaign, because I'd never really run anything that was more than 10 or 15 sessions, and I wanted to really create something that felt real and long and invested. So I searched around for some podcasts and listened to some people play it, and I kind of learned the rules that way and saw how other people did it. And it worked really well. And I ran like a 3-year long, really involved campaign. So when I got ready to do the same thing for Eclipse Phase, I went searching for a podcast, and I stumbled on Caleb's now internet famous No Evil campaign. And of course, immediately felt like there's no way I'm going to live up to this. But since I didn't have to run it for Caleb and his crew, I listened to it and got inspired and then did what was a really successful year-long or 2-year-long Eclipse Phase campaign. And I can't wait to get back to Eclipse Phase. It's my favorite game of all time. It's what Blue Planet. It's what I wanted Blue Planet to be when it grew up. Actually, yeah.
Okay. See, I find it interesting because I used to listen to a ton of actual play podcasts, and time wise, I just don't listen to as many as I used to. But it is very good for not necessarily learning mechanics. Like, you're not going to know all the ins and outs,
Sure.
but to get a really good feel for,
You get the view from orbit.
yeah, kind of how the game plays, and how the players interact, and sort of how different things can go. Like you said, RPPR, you may not recognize the voices, but you probably know whatever they're playing, it kind of has their stamp. So every group kind of has its own spin on things, but it is a very good study tool, I guess, to a certain extent.
Absolutely, yeah. And when you find a good game master, it's also a great way to enhance your own craft, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh, that's cool. But when you started, now back so many years ago, there wasn't Kickstarter. There wasn't, this huge, social media presence with Twitter and all these different things. So
we had a listserv. That was the cutting edge.
A Yahoo group.
Yep, exactly.
So how much research did you have to do before jumping on with Upwind? I mean, was that like a whole project in and of itself to kind of learn the ins and outs and
yes,
kind of?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I didn't realize that. I mean, I knew what Kickstarter was, and I'd seen some things on Kickstarter, and I knew the principle behind it. And I really love the idea of crowdfunding philosophically. I think it's just such a cool way to connect people who make things with people who want those things. And I was excited to be part of it. But when I was thinking about doing Upwind, everyone's telling me, you're going to have to do Kickstarter because that's the way people do it anymore, and especially the small companies, right? Mm-hmm. So I started doing some research, and I thought, what's research? I'll just look at Kickstarters. I mean, that's easy enough, right? So I started looking at Kickstarter pages and all the game pages, and like, oh, that's easy enough. You just put up some pictures and some text, and people buy your game. Right? And then I really started talking to people who knew what they were talking about, and I started realizing there was so much more. And every conversation I had would just pile on the amount of work that was going to be involved. And then people started talking about promoting it through social media. I'm like, oh, social media? I have email. Does that count? And then people are like, well, no, you got to do Facebook. I'm like, I know what Facebook is, and I have an account, but I never use it. So no, you got to start using it. And Twitter, you got to get in Twitter. I'm like, really? Oh God. So I did. I jumped in both feet first. Actually, Ross has been a really helpful guide. Some other guys I've met through him have been really helpful and encouraging. Friends of mine who are much more internet savvy and much more social media savvy were super helpful. And really just doing it has been, being willing to learn and just doing it has been sort of the key to getting anywhere for me. And even though I would not call myself a socially savvy in social media, I'm using the tools, and they're being productive, and I'm meeting lots of neat people, and so that has paid off. I still feel like I'm learning something new every day. That Kickstarter experience itself, once I hit that launch button, has been a whole new world. But getting to that point, getting to hit launch, was hundreds of hours of effort that wasn't writing the game. I never expected that. I didn't realize how much time I was going to have to put in just to structure the Kickstarter page, just to feel like I was making promotions. One of Ross's best advice was, if you're going to do a Kickstarter, you can't just make a Kickstarter page and launch it. You have to be promoting it. You have to have fans out there that, or at least people that are interested. It's not fair to say fans because I don't know if we had any, but had to have people that were interested and that would, when you launch, would go and look at the Kickstarter. You couldn't just count on people stumbling on it.
Sure.
And if you look at any of the pundits that are out there, the people who have done a lot of Kickstarters and they're being really generous with what they've learned, like Jamie Stegmaier and sorry, names are escaping me at the moment, but there's lots of websites out there where people have shared what they've learned about running Kickstarter specifically for games. If you're not combing through those and trying to gain all the knowledge you can from what they've succeeded, how they've succeeded, and then try and apply that to your project, you're really leaving a lot of opportunity on the table.
Mhm.
I don't want to make it sound like I knew that ahead of time and I was so like smart in doing that. People told me to do it, and I said, "Oh, yeah, okay, I better." And I started doing it, and then in the process, realized how valuable it's been.
Sure.
And we were.
And oh, go ahead.
Oh no, no, please.
I was just going to say the gaming community, for the most part, and you have outliers with everything, is super inclusive and really helpful, and definitely shout out to Ross. And I know he's been super helpful with you, but through the years, I used to be on another podcast called Nerdbound, and I've been a fan of RPPR forever. And like out of the blue one day, way back when, I'm like, hey, can we do a Skype? I have some questions. I'm trying to help out with this podcast or whatever. He's like, sure, pick a date, pick a time, we'll get on. So he's really been a pillar of the community as far as podcasters and gaming, and obviously he has something to gain for it, right? I mean, he's a game designer, he has a podcast and all that stuff, but there's people that don't do it that are in the same boat. So I mean, he's been a stalwart, almost from the beginning. I think they started like 2008.
Yeah, super generous and extremely helpful to me. And I know he just gives advice out freely that's super beneficial. And he's connected me with. I mean, if you look, we've done. I think I was counting the other day. By the time we get to the end of this month, and I don't know what's still to come, right? Because I get new emails every day. But we'll have done over 20 different sort of podcasts, actual play, live stream things that I never would have found those on my own. And that's super generous of him because it's really, I guess, if you want to think of that, feeding the competition, right? But the industry is so general, is so helpful. I mean, look, I'm talking with you now, right? And we're talking up about it on a whole other podcast. And
right.
It doesn't feel inappropriate. It feels like this sort of natural family. And it's just one of the things that I like about the gaming industry, but it's also one of the things I'm liking about what I'm learning about social media. It's bringing people together to do things like this. It's just because it's fun and cool.
No, it's definitely I enjoy that aspect of doing what we do and being able to connect people and develop friendships out of it, and in some instances business relationships or whatever. But it's been a very cool experience overall for us, and I'm glad that you are finding sort of the same thing on your end, that you're able to make those connections and all that kind of stuff, because it really is a cool part of our community to have that.
Yeah, and in fact, I think whatever happens to Upwind, the thing I'm most excited about in the future is all these new people that I've met, and all these new projects and games and organizations that I'm learning about that I hadn't known about because I'd been out of the industry for such a long time, and it's just been really fun to reconnect.
Well, it seems, I mean, you're already kicking it out of the park. You're already twice your funding goal, so I don't think you have anything to worry about there.
Yeah, well, that's great too, right? I'm really happy that we are where we are. But in terms of longevity, role playing games,
sure,
they do have that tail. So
right. And when so at the point where you sort of got out of the industry and things like that, were you still actively playing games? Have you said you meet with this one group of guys, once a year, twice a year. Do you have a local group that you play with on a fairly regular basis, or no?
Yeah, not at first. After I wrote Midnight, I actually moved from Missouri, where I said I'd been living, and I had a pretty active gaming life there, weekly game kind of thing. And was really pleased with it, really happy with it. But then I moved to a little tiny town in the mountains of Colorado, where there was, lots of fun things to do, snowboarding, mountain biking, that kind of thing. It was awesome, but nobody gamed. And then I moved, like I think mentioned also after that, to Hawaii. I tried to generate some gaming group there, but it was a little bit unproductive. There just wasn't a lot of people that were into that kind of thing. And then moved here. So there was probably, 5 or 6 years in there where I didn't game at all. I tried to do some over the internet, but the tools for that had not really evolved, and it was not as satisfying as it might have been.
Mm-hmm.
Then I moved here to Tacoma, and first thing I did, like within days of being here, was comb all the local game stores and get on the internet and try and find a local gaming group. And I went through a couple of them, like really fast, really aggressively, really intentionally, like, oh, don't like you because you're a racist. Oh, I don't like you because, you're, also some, yeah, there were some kind of negative experiences, right? But I just kept moving from one to the other pretty quickly. And then I settled into a bunch of guys that I'm still gaming with now. And that's evolved some, and some people have joined us, but it's super active life right now, that a gaming life that I'm really enjoying. I'm playing probably an average of 1.5 games a week,
Nice.
which, it's a lot, big time commitment, but it's been great for playtesting Upwind, for example. These guys have, in fact, that's how they found me. I had been toying with the idea of publishing Upwind when I first moved here, and put out some flyers looking for playtesters. And even though it took me a while to finally commit to doing it, that's how I met some of these guys, and we've been together since. So they've been part of the playtesting process ever since.
Cool. Yeah, it's nice now that we have things like Roll20 and Google Hangouts and stuff like that, and we kind of run the podcast that way because everybody's sort of spread out all over. And some of the sessions are great. Like my friend Neil's running a Fear Itself campaign, and we've been doing that for I don't know 6 or 7 months now, and it's great, and the RP is great, but it's not a minis game. There's not tons of dice rolling and things like that, so it's very it allows. This platform allows that game, I think, to play a lot better than, say, like D&D, which we do also.
Sure,
but there's
sure.
like, okay, can you move me to the no,
Right.
not my character's left, not your left. So there's a lot of that.
Yeah, that's just true. I played a little bit over the internet with it. The card mechanic is fun when you get to do the little reveal of your bid, in real time in front of you flip your cards over together and you're like, oh, dude, you beat, which you kind of lose a little bit over the web. One of our backers and a guy I've been communicating with sort of through the whole process of building up Upwind just sent me yesterday a link. He made a little card bot that players can use online, and it's set up specifically for Upwind, so you can sort your suit out, and you can be the moderator, or you can be a player, and you can play cards and share that with it. And he said he offered that up, and said that one of my tech friends should build it into an actual bot that would use our cards, and can be shared through the internet. So we might actually do that, which would be really cool.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, that's another one of the wondrous thing about the community. We're just talking about bringing people together and communicating, and that would never have happened otherwise, right? If we hadn't been emailing back and forth and sharing messages and stuff.
Sure. What kind of games are you guys playing? With your group, Eclipse Phase, probably.
Yeah, we did Eclipse Phase. Well, we did that big. This group is the one that played that big fantasy, the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay game, and then we played a long D&D game. One of my buddies really wanted to run this D&D game idea he had, so we played. We stepped back and played some 3.5. And another group sort of tangential to this did a really long 4.0 campaign when 4.0 first came out. But then we overlapped that with the Eclipse Phase, and I ran the Eclipse Phase game. And then since the Eclipse Phase game, we've been playing Mutants and Masterminds, actually.
Okay.
Playing some superhero stuff set in their Emerald City supplement, because we're essentially living in that supplement here in the Northwest. So we've been doing that, and then overlapping that with a lot of Upwind playtesting.
Sure, that makes sense. Well, what did you like Fourth or no? I find it interesting because it's so dichotomous to the responses.
I think I mentioned earlier I'm more of a science fiction gaming fan and a more horror gaming fan. I really love fantasy, Warhammer Fantasy, and I really like that setting. And that does it for me, but lots sort of generic Dungeon and Dragon settings don't necessarily. And so I didn't really have a strong feeling either way. 5th edition, 4th edition, 3rd edition. I didn't feel the edition wars very strongly.
Okay, that's fair. I just figured it begged the question.
I liked it. It was fun. It was fun playing with the cards. It did feel different than other versions of Dungeons and Dragons. It helped the keep the paperwork straight, and I enjoyed that part of it. But I'm also evolving into more of a narrativist gamer, and it's definitely, D&D, any iteration definitely is not narrativist, at least in its intention. So I think just mechanically I've moved away from that. But I'll play anything. I mean, if someone has a mechanic for flipping a coin, I'll play it if they can tell a good story with it, because that's what I'm in for. It's a good story. Oh, I think your cat may have disconnected you. You're out again.
Nope, there it is. He stepped on the mic. Have you ever played Fiasco?
I have. Love it. It is one of my favorite games of all time. Yeah. We played Eclipse Fiasco recently. I don't know if you've seen there's a play set called Eclipse Fiasco. And it obviously, by the name, it's a Fiasco game set in the Eclipse Phase universe. And we played, I played quite a bit of Fiasco and really love it.
Cool.
I really want to write a play set in Blue Planet. I think that would be fun.
Cool. Yeah, I've had the opportunity to play a handful of times, and it's always been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a great game. And those kinds of games interest me more and more now, those sort of little self-contained experiences. There's a lot of really neat ones out there, and I'd love to work on one of those at some point.
Cool. All right. I think we could probably start rolling into our final 5 here, but if you want to, give out all your contact information, we're talking about all social media, so Twitter handles and all that kind of stuff.
You can find us. Our website is biohazardgames.us. You can find us on Facebook under Biohazard Games. I'm on Twitter. Yeah. You can follow me at Biohazard Jeff. And then, of course, the Kickstarter is up and going, and so you can contact us through that. And I think that covers the bases anyway.
Okay, cool. And I will have all of these things in the show notes, so people can find you through this interview.
Absolutely, yeah. John, I just want to really thank you for bringing me on. It's been super fun doing these interviews and having these conversations. And like I said, it's been really valuable for looking at the game and what we're trying to get out of it, and how we're supposed to structure it. But I just appreciate your time and generosity, and not only the help promoting, but also just getting to talk about games. I really appreciate it.
No, well, definitely thank you for coming on. I mean, this is all part of the service, But no, I mean, it's super enjoyable for me, and for the other guys, Vince is on, and Neil and Jesse and a bunch of the other guys will, sort of jump in and out as we have different people on, and it's super enjoyable for me, because like you said, we coming on, there's that instant connection of, we love games and we're playing games, and we're looking at new things, and it's just an enjoyable experience to really kind of make those contacts and make connections with people, and it's always a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
No, absolutely. So I gave you a little bit of a rundown pre-show. So we have our thing called the Final 5. It's 5 geeky, nerdy questions. It's kind of a binary thing, but you can expound on your answers as much as you wish. So
all right.
There's no limitations here, and we'll jump right in. The first.
All right, I'm ready.
Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Trek.
Okay.
Not because I want to, but because of Ewoks, man. And then it just went south from there.
Well, those first 3, the 1, 2, and 3 are terrible. But
yeah, I was 12 years old when the first Star Wars came out, and it changed my life. It made me the geek I am. And I just felt like my genetics my core just got ripped out of me with everything that came after. So yeah, I gotta go with Star Trek. And I know a lot of people are gonna hate this too, but I'll tell you what, the reboot. I think at least the first movie, I thought it was genius. Yeah, I thought it was a great way to reboot the whole Star Trek setting.
I enjoyed the new movies. I grew up, watching didn't grow up. I mean, obviously it was on before I was born, but my dad used to watch them in reruns, so I used to watch them. And at the time, the stories that they were telling and stuff were, sort of groundbreaking at the time. But
right,
like
absolutely.
I saw Star Wars when I was 5, I think 5 or 6. So yeah, I mean, just like huge indelible experience to experience that. But I thought your reason was going to be because Star Trek is more of a hard sci-fi as opposed to Star Wars, which is sort of
No, that's good
spaghetti
reasoning.
western
Yeah, it's good
fantasy.
reasoning. But you know, I was Star Wars all the time when I was on it when I was a kid. And I'll tell you what, I'm probably going to revoke my geek card for this, but I haven't seen the new movie.
Really?
No,
Um,
that's how bad. That's how heartbroken I am.
it it would. After those movies, I saw them in the theater. We went to midnight show.
Mhm.
I saw them in the theater a couple of times, and the further we got away from it because it had been so long, it was like, wow, this really sucks. Like, I can't even watch them now. And it's
Yeah.
really, like you say, it's sort of ruined my enjoyment of the original trilogy. Uh, I can't tell you the last time I popped one of those in the DVD player and just
Mhm.
sat and watched them and enjoyed them because those 3 movies were so bad.
All right. Well, I'm not going to say I'm not going to watch the most recent one, but I didn't want to go to the theater and pay more money for it, right? I mean, I'm sure I'll see it at some point. Yeah, I'll see it on DVD or something at some point. But
I think it's on Stars right now.
it's not abject hatred. It's just heartbreak is all. It's like you don't want to
Are
see.
you going to?
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, are you going to go see Rogue Squadron when it comes out?
It depends. Probably not. Like, I'll be honest, probably not.
Okay, all right.
I'll see him someday. Right.
All right.
Got too many games to write.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Tabletop or video games?
Tabletop. Yeah,
Okay.
easy, hands down. I love video games. I have an Xbox, but if I had the choice between sitting around a table with my friends playing a game or playing a video game, hands down, sit around a table with my friends.
Well, let me spin it this way then. Tabletop as far as RPG or board games?
Or RPG, for sure.
Okay.
I like board games because there's bleed over. The board games I like the best are the ones that tell story. Like one of my big favorites these days is Firefly and Dead of Winter. If it's a board game that tells a story, a great example, Trail House on the Hill. Those are my favorite kinds. The more abstract it becomes, the less interested I am in playing it. It's all about the story for me, and that's why I love RPGs.
Right. Yeah, if I'm going to do a couple hours at one time, I'd rather do an RPG than a board game.
Yeah, I feel that.
All right. DC or Marvel?
It's a good question. I feel like I missed the whole comic book thing when I was a kid. I think I would have been an addict if I'd had access. We lived out in the sticks. I didn't have any money. Like, comic books were just this thing that I knew they existed, but I didn't realize that they were serials. I didn't realize that they were something that you could sort of go in every week and get your new Spider-Man. If I'd been able to do that, I think it would have been a different picture. So honestly, I'm only into comic books as much as the average moviegoer these days. So I'd have to say I love Iron Man, and I totally dug the Deadpool movie. So I'm gonna have to go Marvel, I guess.
Okay, that's pretty consistent. Most people are Marvel or Batman
yeah, Batman's cool. I may also lose my geek card for this, but I'll tell you what. I recently saw, what was it, Batman versus Superman. I hadn't seen it in the theater, and I didn't hate it.
Yeah,
everyone seemed to loathe it, but I really dug on the whole moral dilemma that they were both sort of in, particularly Superman, right? Like, this idea that the world hated him now and all he was trying to do was help. I realized that there's a million reasons why hardcore fans disliked it all, and I can sympathize. But that part of the story really kind of resonated with me, and I enjoyed watching that resolve. So I didn't hate it.
Sure. Yeah, well, conflict, drives story,
Sure.
whether it's an RPG or a movie or whatever. So to have that sort of, moral conundrum. But, when you have the super dark Batman and then super dark Superman, it's like, eh.
Right.
All right, I'm going to jump around because we know the answer to the next one, which is sci-fi or fantasy. So I feel like there's no point in asking that one.
Fair enough.
But how about the Doctor Who or Firefly?
Oh, you're killing me because
see, I love this.
I adore both of those. Firefly, I love, love, love. But
but you only got one season.
But I also, well, I know, but I still love it, right? And maybe my personal theory is that's why we love it. If it had a chance to live its course, it might not have been so lovable.
Right.
But I also love me some Doctor Who from way back, right? Like Tom Baker was my doctor when I was a kid. But David Tennant, man, I love David Tennant, and I love Matt Baker. I love the whole the new reboot. I think that's a great reimagining of from this plotting 20-minute like really campy old school science fiction from back in the 70s to this frenetic, like it's still kind of campy, but it's like just constant laughing, also very poignant. I love it. It's great storytelling. Yeah, smear some Stephen Moffat on anything and I'll watch it.
All right. So we'll say Doctor Who then probably.
Well, it's still going, right? So yeah. I guess if you had to put me on a desert island and I didn't have anything to watch, I'd say Doctor Who because there's more to watch, right?
All right. That's fair. And we'll go with if you could be a supernatural creature, what would it be? Because of your affinity for dark fiction,
a supernatural creature.
Werewolf, vampire, the standard sort of thing.
Yeah, I think a werewolf. Yeah, I think so. I love the brooding nature of one, right? Like that you got this thing that comes around every month and curses you. I love the identity that at least a lot of the modern portrayals have. I don't know if you're familiar with Being Human, the BBC version of Being Human.
I haven't watched it, but I know of it. Yeah,
I really enjoyed that, and I liked how they tied that in. And whenever we played back in the day, and I'll shout out to Stuart Wick because he's my new publishing partner. Right back in the day when we played a lot of World of Darkness, I always wanted to be the werewolf, so I'm gonna have to say werewolf.
All right, that's cool. All right, well, that's all I have. Again, I want to thank you for coming on. It was a pleasure to talk to you and try to help you promote, Upwind.
I appreciate it. Yeah, man, it's great. Really good to get to meet you and chat, and really appreciate the help with the game.
Absolutely. I'll give out our contact details here at the end, like I always do. It's you can find this podcast and all of our other cool stuff at legendsoftabletop.com. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, you could reach out to us at legendsoftabletop@gmail.com. We're on Twitter at legendstabletop, no of. We're on Instagram and all the other stuff, so you can check us out at all those things. If you go to the website, there's a calendar up on the left. I think next week, I think I have Seth Jaffe coming on. And after that, I couldn't tell you. James Ernst is coming up at some point. The guys from Bad Cat Games. There's a bunch of stuff going on, so go and check that out.
Sounds great.
Yeah, we're trying to get everybody in, rush for the end of the year here, and have an interview with Andy Looney that I'm going to be publishing soon-ish. So looking forward to that. So again, thanks for coming on. Thanks for everybody for checking it out, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Thanks for sharing your time, everybody.